BuildAid Media, powered by builders and supported by Mix 93.8 FM and SA Garden and Home, are proud to bring you this homeowner workshop series. Throughout this series, we will be showcasing a wide variety of industry specialists to ensure a positive building experience.
Craig Denecker chats to Graham Alexander at the 9th BuildAid Homeowner Workshop about the importance of planning your landscaping and garden.
So planning your garden, when should you get involved?
Ideally as soon as possible. Once you have a house plan and you already know the layout of the house in relation to the stand, at that point we can start working out where beds will go, where features like fire pits and swimming pools and things can go. While the architect may put the pool on the plan, quite often they'll just tick a box and say we've got the pool on the plan. We'll take more sort of care and attention to what's happening outside of the house. But the sooner you plan, the better, and then start to budget, because at the end of the project, as you were mentioning earlier, very, very seldom that people are anywhere near their budgets, and the garden is the last thing that you install, so it means that by the time you get to the end of the project, there's no budget left for garden, and you try and take a small amount of money and dilute it over your entire property.
The other resources that go into landscaping or a garden, Craig, it's not simply about plants.
No.
You've got irrigation, and we'll chat to Alison in a sec about paving, swimming pools, and so on. Do you include all of those in your design service?
Yeah, so we take a holistic approach to our to landscaping. It's not landscaping per se. Quite often when people think of landscaping, they're thinking of what you can buy at your local nursery. We look at how you use your space. We do a lot of what we would call designer outdoor spaces. So that's outdoor kitchens, fire pit areas, water features, pathways, patios, anything that invites you out. We try and make it that when you're sitting inside your house and you look outside, you must be envious and say, I shouldn't be sitting inside my house, I should be using the space that I bought, because ultimately you choose to live in a home with garden space. If you don't use the garden space, you may as well live in an apartment. So we take a different approach and see how all the different components, plants, irrigation, also in terms of the speakers, we use water storage tanks with rain harvesting. We use paving tiles and cladding products from Creative. So all those things come together to make an environment outdoors rather than just plants.
A lot of modern estates, and I don't want to name any because I could get into trouble, beautiful homes built very close to each other, and contemporary architecture using a lot of glass. You could almost wave at your neighbour. In fact, you could always talk to your neighbour.
Shake hands.
So there's a place for landscaping and trees to assist in breaking those spaces. And something I saw recently that I thought was quite nice was a vertical garden. And it was quite high. It was sort of like 4 meters high. And it completely blocked the neighbour out, which was the intention. It was so good, the client was going to ask the neighbour for a contribution to this vertical garden. Does it play a role, or do you need to know who the neighbour is and what's going on?
To a large degree, people will, it's mutually beneficial. So if you don't want to see your neighbour, the odds are your neighbour's not going to want to see you either. So if you do put up some kind of screening, mostly it'll tend to be plant screening, because it's one of the more cost-effective options. Those green walls, there are myriad of different suppliers of different systems, each with their own pros and cons, but it's a more pricey way to go about it. They look fantastic if they maintain properly, but that's another thing that people are not usually aware of, is that they require ongoing maintenance. It's not something that you can just put up in the magazines. They look fantastic, but that's photographs taken in its prime. So.
Craig, I guess that you guys would include pots and planters. It's not just about flower beds and lawns.
No, we quite often will use pots in our designs, especially in courtyard areas, because it's a more of a decor thing as well. It's not just a practical thing to hold soil, as well as raised planters. So you have courtyard gardens. If you have a raised planter, you can incorporate seating into that area. It allows you to have things like water features. So we try and take it, not just make something that's bland look less bland. We try and make it a feature and a destination. So that's something that maybe in the past it was a place you used to hang your washing, and now it's a place where every Sunday morning you have brunch with the family. So that we try and completely take it to something that's not ticking a box, it's something that becomes something you look forward to using.
In theory, you should have a winter outside area,
Yeah.
a summer area, and a spring or autumn area, depending on the seasons. What types of gardens are popular, and what I mean here, sort of edible gardens, indigenous gardens? Well, let's say, how many are there, which ones are popular?
Well, you say many, and there's also, it's quite a blurred line between some of the different categories. But now the recent and ongoing drought restrictions and lack of available water, water storage is becoming more and more popular, and water-wise gardens. So water-wise is not necessarily indigenous. Indigenous has more to do with where the plants come from, and that's a geographic thing worked out by man. It's not nature. So we drew maps saying this is going to be South Africa, and what's within that is indigenous to South Africa, but it's not that meaningful as people sometimes think. And when it comes to water-wise gardening, it's more the use of different types of succulents and plants that don't require much water. And ideally, if you try and save water, there's a concept known as xeriscaping, where you have plants which essentially look after themselves. They don't require any additional water or nutrition to survive in the area in which they're planted. But they don't necessarily have to be indigenous. If you take, for example, a cactus that comes from South America, it doesn't require much water, so it's water-wise, but it's nowhere near indigenous. So indigenous normally fits in more in terms of aesthetics, in my view. So if you're if you've got a game farm or a lodge out in the middle of the bush, it may look a bit odd to have palm trees at your entrance.
Hopefully you won't be allowed to do that.
No, probably not. So the thing is that's where the aesthetics, and you say, okay, well, let's go for some acacias and some grasses and other plants which are more suited to that aesthetic.
And edible gardens?
Yeah, very much. Again, between the different sicknesses which people often attribute to what they eat, you don't really know where the food comes from that you eat, where the seeds come from, what pesticides were used on those plants. So people are generally, we get a lot of requirements from our clients in terms of sometimes formal veggie gardens, which we make into a feature area, not just a ruffled bit of garden with the odd millie in it. Some people call that a vegetable garden. And we would then, if they don't have the space for that, even just to put herbs and the odd tomato plant or something similar in the garden within the space of the normal planting, because quite often it fits in, and if you know where they are, you know where to go and forage when it's time to look. You've just got to compete with the birds.
That vertical garden that I mentioned earlier, we thought about putting some edible stuff in there, but then we would have needed a ladder to get to it. So this started to become a bit of a work of art, all on its own.
Yeah.
And I hope it all works out from an edible point of view. Does a garden have a sound?
Yeah.
Based on what you've used in it?
Yes, absolutely. So the garden basically has opportunity to give you all of the five senses, and sound is definitely one of them. There's the rustling of the leaves and when there's wind. The water features, fantastic example. Even when people have a swimming pool, quite often in a design, it's normally just a hole in the ground with water, which is basically like a really big bucket. If you just add a small little trickle of water that feeds back into the pool, it's a negligible cost if you're building a pool, but it now livens up the area. It creates a soundtrack for the area, and that soundtrack also helps to mask traffic noise and other ambient sounds that you could have in the area. So apart from the masking of the other sounds, it creates a nice tranquil environment. It's almost like having a dead silent room versus just having a radio in the background. It just feels more appealing to be in that space. So they obviously have the birds and the crickets and so on that give a bit of soundtrack as well. So it's a very noisy place.
And sometimes it can be done purposefully. You mentioned a millie a little while ago. We had a client that grew up on a farm and liked the sound of millies at a certain time of year. So we did the whole front garden. It's in a house in Sandhurst. The front garden, obviously millies they're not there all year, but that sound was important to her and her living space. So sometimes you can create those things.
Absolutely.
And I think we're not aware that we're listening to things like winter leaves. And in autumn, the leaves are gone, things get a little bit more quiet, the birds start moving out. So a garden can do other things other than look good.
But you also realize once you've spent a bit of money, invested in your garden, it grows and changes through the seasons, it changes over time, and it's something you become more cognizant of because it's something you've just invested in. So it's not just an outdoor space anymore, it's something that you'll notice, oh look, this plant is in flower. Trees, for me a tree is a weird thing, it's always there, but at some point in time as it grows, there's a critical mass that it achieves, and there's a sort of a watershed moment when you look and you see, wow, it's a big tree suddenly. Meanwhile, it's a slow process, but you just notice it immediately at a certain point in time, and it's those things that you'll realize as you have a garden that's newly planted or reasonably newly planted.
Some people think I'm a bit crazy, including my wife. When I stand on a site, particularly when we're designing lodges and in the bush, and you just stand there, a site has a soul. It's about sound, it's about temperature, it's about the smells, it's about a whole lot of things. And you can make a happy garden. You'll know you're happy.
Yeah.
If it's hooked up correctly. Craig, give us some guidelines on budgeting.
So internationally they talk about 10% of the value of your home if you invest in your garden. But we find, as we were saying earlier, with the houses which are the proportion of house to the stand size is a lot larger. So we see typically between about 5 and 7.5%. But we try as much as possible to design according to a budget, but you have to be realistic. It's like going to a fast food restaurant and go to KFC and buy 2 pieces and chips. You're not going to feed a family of 10. So it's the same as with your garden. You've got to be realistic and understand that you're covering a certain area and it's being covered by lawn, shrubs, a tennis court, a swimming pool, but each of those things has a cost roughly per square meter. You can work it back. It's academics at the end of the day, but it's not really meaningful in the beginning. But also what one can do, if you've got a design that fulfills all of your requirements in terms of your wish list of fire pits and paving and patios and stormwater drain capture, then you can decide on your priorities and you can install it in phases. So those phases could be over a few months or a few years, but ultimately you're working towards a solid blueprint rather than ad hoc sort of, let's do the driveway garden, let's have a look around the pool area. That becomes it's like a chess set. It's just all over the place. It's not something that's congruent.
You get, if you like, young plants or baby plants and old plants, little trees, big trees. And I know trees on a drawing are sometimes marked not only what they are, but how big they are. Just give me an idea. I've got a new property and I need a reasonably big tree because I want to hire my neighbor or something. And sometimes we forget 3-meter tree, I think that's a big tree, and they're actually not that big. Give us an idea. If we bought your cheapest big tree, and I have no idea what species that would be. Let's say it's a 4-meter tree. How much would that cost?
You're probably looking between 2,500 rand for the bigger 100-liter trees. We're in a weird industry where we don't talk about the thing that we're selling, we talk about the box. So you talk about the bag that the plant's planted in. But for me personally, I prefer planting a bagged tree. If you want a bigger tree than 100 litre, you can find some 200 litres and then what they call ex-open ground, which is a tree that's harvested from the ground. But the problem with that is that a lot of the roots are cut off during this process. The young roots are miles away from the trunk. And then there you can pay 20, 30, 40,000 rand because of the equipment. You need cranes and a flatbed truck, and that starts getting hectic. But I'd say around 2,500 rand you get a very nice size tree.
Yeah. Now the reason I asked the question was to get to that point, is if we're planning correctly and we have a budget and the architect and the specialists are all working within that budget, we can have a big tree. It's going to come off somewhere else within that budget, but if we haven't budgeted things and we've got a house that's probably we're never going to have a big tree.
You can plant a small one, they get big, eh?
Yeah. And we're all transient though. I believe the stats in South Africa show that on average we move every 8 years. So it depends how long your tree takes to.
Quite often we fix up the house for the next guy.
I think what's coming out of this morning's discussion is we take time planning, talk to the right guys. It can be a lot of fun and you're going to get it right. but you need time. You cannot design and plan a home in 1 month. It takes months, and then the thing will go successfully.
Thank you for joining us. If you would like to watch any more of the workshops in the Homeowner series, follow the BuildAid YouTube channel or visit our website buildaid.co.za, where you can find a full range of our product offering. To book your seat at our next workshop, visit caxtonevents.co.za. Don't forget to tune into Mix 93.8 FM Wednesday evenings from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. to listen to the BuildAid show.